Europeans have finally had enough, and it is bringing the entire dealership empire crashing down. For decades, they paid whatever the big brands asked, a fortune for a badge and a showroom. Not anymore. Right now, 1 in 10 new cars in Europe is Chinese, as buyers abandon their overpriced European cars for ones that cost far less and do far more. And dealerships are getting crushed from the other side too, as the car makers gut them, closing showrooms and cutting dealers out entirely. Mercedes alone is axing a fifth of its German dealers. So is this the end of the dealership ripoff, and who gets buried when it falls? Make sure you subscribe, because I started this channel for one reason: to share what dealerships and car makers don't want you to hear. With your support, I can keep making these videos. Now let's get into it. Let's start with the revolt, because that is exactly what this is. For generations, the deal in Europe was dead simple. If you wanted a nice car, you went to a big fancy dealership, you paid a premium for a German or European badge, and you accepted that the price was simply the price. That entire cozy arrangement is now falling apart at the seams, because European buyers have suddenly discovered that they no longer have to play that game at all. In 2025, Chinese brands sold around 811,000 cars across Europe, and that number very nearly doubled in a single year, jumping by 99%. By the end of the year, roughly 1 in every 10 new cars sold on the entire continent was a Chinese car. Just think for a second about how absurdly fast that happened. Only a few years ago, a Chinese car on a European road was almost unheard of, a novelty. Now it is 1 out of every 10 and climbing fast. The Chinese brand MG sold over 300,000 cars in Europe. BYD, the company that already knocked Tesla clean off its throne, tripled its sales in a single year to nearly 200,000. And here is the simple reason all of this is happening. These cars are cheaper, and in a whole lot of ways, they are genuinely better. They come absolutely loaded with technology that the European brands charge a small fortune for, at prices that undercut them badly. In fact, the average price of these Chinese imports actually dropped by around 27% in a single year, which completely wiped out the tariffs that Europe had slapped on them to try to keep them out in the first place. So the European buyer, standing there in the showroom, is quietly doing the math. Pay $60,000 for an overpriced German car, or pay $40,000 for a Chinese one that has more features and a longer warranty. More and more of them are picking the second option and walking straight out the door. And it is not just MG and BYD anymore. A whole army of Chinese brands is now pouring into Europe, names most people have never even heard of yet, all of them cheaper and better equipped than what the locals are selling. It has gotten so bad, so fast, that the European parts suppliers are cracking under the strain, with roughly 1 in every 5 of the smaller suppliers now sitting in what analysts openly call the critical zone, meaning they may not survive. That, right there, is the revolt. And the very first businesses getting crushed underneath it are the dealerships. Now let's talk about why the Europeans got so completely fed up in the first place, because they did not turn on their own beloved brands for no reason at all. For years, the European car makers got greedy, plain and simple. They looked at their prestigious badges and their loyal, trusting customers, and they decided to squeeze them for every last penny they could get. Prices climbed higher and higher, year after year, far faster than anybody's wages ever did. But it was not just the sticker price that did it. It was the constant nickel and diming that came along with it. These brands actually started locking basic features behind monthly subscriptions. There was that infamous moment when a major German brand tried to charge people an ongoing monthly fee just to use the heated seats that were already physically built into the car they had already bought and paid for. Really think about the sheer arrogance of that. You pay $60,000 for the car, the seats are sitting right there in it, and they want yet another payment just to let you switch them on. And the quality did not always come close to justifying those prices either. Buyers were paying top premium money for cars that nickel and dime them at every turn, quietly harvested their data, and came stuffed with complicated, glitchy technology that constantly broke. So that prestigious badge, the one that used to mean something, the one that used to feel like a reward for years of hard work, slowly started to feel like a trap instead. And then along came the Chinese brands, offering a car that simply gave you everything: no games, no subscriptions, no lectures, for thousands and thousands less. And for an enormous number of European buyers, that was the final straw. They suddenly realized the emperor had no clothes, that they had been paying a fortune for a badge in a fancy showroom and getting overpriced junk in return. Here's my honest opinion on it. The very moment your customers start to feel like every single interaction with you is designed to extract more money from their pocket, you have already lost them. The European brands completely forgot that, and now their own loyal buyers are punishing them for it. But those buyers walking away is still only half the reason the dealerships are actually dying. The other half is a genuine act of betrayal, coming from the car makers themselves. Because at the exact same moment buyers were abandoning them, the dealers got stabbed right in the back by the very companies whose cars they sell. The manufacturers looked at their own shrinking profits, and they decided they wanted a much bigger slice of every single sale for themselves. So they started aggressively pushing something called the agency model. And here is what that actually means for you. Under the old traditional system, a dealer buys the cars from the manufacturer, sells them to you, makes a profit in the middle, and crucially, can haggle and negotiate on the price. Under the new agency model, all of that simply disappears. The manufacturer sets one single fixed price, sells the car directly to you, very often online, and the dealer gets reduced to little more than a delivery and service point, handing you the keys for a tiny flat fee. The dealer loses the power to negotiate, loses the profit margin, and loses most of the entire reason they exist in the first place. And the car makers are moving on this fast. Mercedes-Benz announced it is cutting up to 20% of its dealers in Germany and 10% of its dealers across the whole world as it pushes to sell most of its European cars directly, and a huge chunk of them purely online. The company has openly said it wants around 80% of its European sales handled through this new agency system, and a full quarter of them done entirely online within just a few short years. Read that again. One of the most famous dealership brands on the planet is telling the world it wants most of its own dealers to essentially disappear. Just think about what that does to a dealer who has sunk millions into a fancy showroom, built up an entire business over decades, and employs dozens of local people. Overnight, the company they built their whole life around turns to them and says, "Congratulations, you are now just a glorified pickup counter." Some of the car makers pushed this so hard and so fast that their own dealers openly revolted against them. When Stellantis tried to force the agency model across Europe, the backlash from its own dealers was so fierce that the company was forced to suspend the entire plan. But make absolutely no mistake about the direction this is all heading. The car makers want the dealers gone or reduced to obedient servants. So the poor dealer is now being crushed from both sides at exactly the same time, abandoned by the buyer below him and betrayed by the manufacturer above him. And when you get squeezed that hard from both directions at once, you eventually break. All across Europe, car dealerships are quietly going under. Showrooms that stood proudly for decades are closing their doors for the last time. Big dealer groups are being swallowed up or shut down entirely, and every single one of those closures is real, living people. Picture a dealer principal in a mid-sized German town, a man whose family has sold cars in that same spot for 40 years, employed generations of local people, and sponsored the local football team every season. He did absolutely everything right. And now his sales are collapsing because his customers are quietly buying Chinese, and his profit margin is being strangled to nothing because the manufacturer wants to sell direct. He is standing there watching a business that his own father built slowly die, through no fault of his own, caught helplessly in a war between the giant car makers and the fed-up buyers. Picture all the salespeople, the mechanics, the parts staff, every one of whom is about to lose a steady, skilled, well-paying job. This is happening in towns all across Europe right now, quietly, one closed showroom at a time. Whole high streets that once had a proud car showroom on the corner now have a boarded-up building sitting there instead. That is what a collapsing industry actually looks like from the ground. Not a headline on the news, but an empty lot where 100 local people used to earn a living. And here is the truly brutal irony buried in it. For years, absolutely everybody hated the car dealership. The pushy salesman, the endless haggling, that nagging feeling of getting ripped off on the way out. But the thing now replacing it is not some wonderful consumer paradise. It is a system where the giant manufacturer controls every single thing, sets one price you cannot argue with, and answers to nobody at all. So be very careful what you wish for, and do not for 1 second think the manufacturer is doing any of this to pass savings on to you. They are cutting out the dealer to keep that margin for themselves, not to hand it back to the buyer. So you get a worse deal, no one to haggle with, and a giant faceless corporation that already overpriced the car, now controlling the only price on offer. The buyer loses the dealer as an ally, and the dealer loses everything. The only winner in the whole arrangement is the exact company that started this mess by overpricing its cars in the first place. But the reason every bit of this is happening all at once comes down to one simple, brutal truth about the entire European car business. And that truth is this. The old way of selling cars in Europe was built for a world that simply does not exist anymore. It was built for a time when a small handful of premium brands held all of the power, when buyers had no real alternative to speak of, and when everybody just quietly accepted paying a fat premium for the privilege of a nice badge. That entire world is now gone. The Chinese brands did not just show up with cheaper cars, they showed up with a completely different way of selling them. Many of them sell direct, online, with simple, honest, fixed prices, and none of the enormous expensive overhead of a marble palace sitting on the edge of every town. No haggling, no games, no bloated dealer network quietly baked into the final price. And the European buyers, the very people who spent decades resenting all of that overhead, took one single look at it and said, "Yes, I will gladly have that instead." Because it turns out the thing buyers always hated was never really the car itself. It was everything wrapped around it, the markup, the pressure, the pushy salesman, the enormous overhead they were quietly forced to pay for. Strip all of that away, and suddenly buying a car feels less like walking into a battle and more like ordering anything else in your life. The Chinese brands did not just build a better car, they quietly deleted the single most dreaded part of the entire experience, and European buyers noticed it instantly. So now the European car makers are trapped in a truly impossible position. They are frantically trying to copy the Chinese model, cutting their own dealers and going direct, but they are trying to do it while still carrying all of the old costs, all of the old inflated prices, and all of the old arrogance. They are desperately trying to become lean and cheap overnight after decades of being fat and expensive, and the effort is tearing their own retail networks to shreds in the process. The dealership is simply the very first thing to fall because it is the most expensive, most visible piece of an entire model that no longer works, but it absolutely will not be the last. Because here is the real story sitting right underneath all of it. What is actually collapsing here is not just a bunch of car dealerships, it is the entire overpriced European car model itself. For decades, that whole model ran on one simple bargain. You, the buyer, agreed to pay a hefty premium, and in return you got a prestigious badge, a fancy showroom experience, and the comforting belief that you were buying something genuinely special. And Europeans have finally taken a long, hard look at that bargain, done the math, and decided that it was a ripoff all along. They are done paying a small fortune for a badge. They are done being nickel and dimed with endless subscriptions. They are done with the overhead, the games, and the pure arrogance of it all. And the very moment enough of them quietly decided that, the whole towering structure began to come down. The dealerships are collapsing first simply because they are the front line, the exact place where the buyer and the overpriced car physically meet. But standing right behind them, the brands themselves are now completely exposed. Because if the only thing you were ever truly selling was prestige and a feeling, and your customers suddenly stop believing in that prestige, then you have absolutely nothing left to sell that a cheaper, hungrier rival cannot simply do better. And that is the genuinely terrifying position the great European brands now find themselves in. They spent decades carefully training their own customers to happily pay more, and now those very same customers have finally learned that they never actually had to. Once a buyer learns a lesson like that, he does not ever unlearn it. And a brand that only ever really sold a feeling is in very, very serious trouble the moment that feeling finally wears off. And you can already see the raw fear setting in. Why else would the proudest, most arrogant names in the entire business suddenly be slashing their prices, cutting their own loyal dealers, and frantically scrambling to copy a Chinese playbook they used to openly sneer at? That is not the behavior of a confident, healthy empire. That is the behavior of a giant that just glanced down at its own feet and realized the solid ground it always stood on is simply not there anymore. And before you sit there assuming this is purely a European problem, look a little closer, because the very same cracks are already spreading everywhere. Over in America, the buyers are every bit as fed up as the Europeans are. They are sick to death of dealer markups, sick of $60,000 and $70,000 price tags, and sick of feeling squeezed and cheated at every single turn. Tesla already proved, years ago, that people will happily buy a car directly, online, with no dealer and no haggling whatsoever. And those very same Chinese brands currently crushing Europe are already circling America too, held back for now by nothing but tariffs. The lesson coming out of Europe is simple, and it is completely universal. When you spend years and years treating your own customers like a resource to be squeezed, instead of people to be served, you quietly build up an enormous debt of resentment. And one day, when a cheaper and better option finally appears on the scene, that entire debt comes due all at once. The Europeans are collecting on that debt right now, in real time, and the very first casualties are their dealerships. So the only real question left for everyone else, on every other continent, is not whether the exact same reckoning is coming for them. It is simply a matter of when, because a customer who feels ripped off never truly forgets it. He just quietly waits for the door to open, and over in Europe, that door just swung wide open. The next wave of Chinese brands is already landing across Europe over the coming months, cheaper and better equipped than ever before, and every single one of them is another nail in the old dealership's coffin. Subscribe so you see exactly how far this collapse ends up spreading and who falls next before it finally reaches the showroom near you.